Give us the context of this most recent statement. Of course, this is not the first time.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I think we're in a place now where we're talking a lot more about places like Panama and Greenland than we have perhaps in the past in a lot of places around this country. But to sort of back up for you here, Greenland is a country that the former president, that the president-elect talked about in his last term, talked about acquiring from Denmark. And to explain that, Greenland is an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. And the folks in Denmark said, no, Greenland is not for sale. I want you to hear a little bit, though, of what Mr. Trump had to say about Greenland. This was back in 2019. Watch this.
I don't know. It got released somehow. It's just something we talked about. Denmark essentially owns it. We're very good allies with Denmark. We protect Denmark like we protect large portions of the world. So the concept came up, and I said certainly I'd be strategically it's interesting, and we'd be interested. I thought that the Prime Minister's statement that it was absurd, it was an absurd idea, was nasty. I thought it was an inappropriate statement. All she had to do is say, no, we wouldn't be interested.
So the Prime Minister of Denmark back then said, no, we're not interested in the sale. Trump was supposed to travel to Denmark and canceled that trip as a result of some of the comments back then. And again, here we are in 2024. The idea of somehow acquiring Denmark has come up again and again. Acquiring Greenland has come up again. And again, the response from Greenland, from Denmark, has been that Greenland is not for sale and never is going to be. And so it's a non-starter conversation from their perspective. Richard.
Thanks for that, Aaron. Julie, to you on this. When you think of Greenland, why might the president-elect be interested in Greenland? Is it national security? Is it natural resources? What might be the logic behind this? We did not hear about this discussed during the election, and we're hearing it now, of course, at his first major rally since becoming president-elect.
Well, I'm not going to sane-wash Donald Trump by trying to describe what motives he might have to trying to acquire Greenland or trying to make Canada the 51st state or trying to make the Panama Canal American again, other than to say that he has an expansionist view that is very much in line with his hero, Vladimir Putin, who apparently also wants to seize land that doesn't belong to his country. It's strange because I think people voted for Donald Trump because of the price of eggs, right? They didn't vote for Donald Trump because they want to annex Greenland or they want to get retaliation on behalf of the Trump organization that was accused of evading taxes in Panama by going after the Panamanians and their canal. And certainly, I don't think anybody's interested in making Canada the 51st state who voted for Donald Trump. So I can't really think of the rationale for this other than this is something that obviously was put in his ear by somebody, and he decided to run with it, which is usually how he creates policy and has for the last 10 years.
Governor, I want to lean in on the topic of the Panama Canal and Panama, and I want you to listen first off to a Republican congressman and what he said about this idea of the Panama Canal.
I always take them seriously, even though they may sound a little bit, out there. I always take the president seriously, and it's a legitimate threat to Panama. He wants a better deal. And I think we need to get a better deal from Panama. And also we need to get rid of Chinese influence on the Panama Canal.
So, Governor, two ways or two items that were brought up by that Congress member. First off, the cost could be hundreds of thousands of dollars per boat, which is what the president says is why he's interested. They're too high, those fees. Second of all, is this idea of China and Russia and a trade route and being competitive with China. Your thought?
Well, yeah, Richard, let me cover both of them. First of all, with Greenland. Look, Greenland has what's called rare earth materials. These are very, very important for national security, for a lot of U.S. manufacturing. China, who we're kind of in a trade war with, not kind of, we're in a trade war with, has a lot of these rare earth materials. It would make sense for us to be able to work with the Danes to make sure that we have access to them. And, of course, it's also a shipping lane as well. So, but we're not going to get to the point where we're going to, buy Greenland. But I want to cover also the Panama Canal. The problem there is first of all, there are high rates for going through the canal. But look, it's being those ships that are going through that canal are not U.S. They're foreign carriers. And they're charging us an arm and a leg, not just down in Panama, but really all over the world. So, who are those ships? Where do they come from? They come from Denmark. They come from Germany. You see, this all gets back, Richard, to the issue of NATO and our allies. And this is what we have to be careful of. If we are, insulting them or stepping on them, at some point, they're not going to want to cooperate with us. And that's really an issue here. Look, there's a legitimate concern about these rare earth materials. There's a legitimate concern, but we don't have foreign carriers. We don't have U.S. carriers. We have foreign carriers, and it's like a monopoly, and they rip us off. There's no question about it. But in order to get that under control, we're going to have to work with other governments. We don't want to insult other governments. That's my view of this.
Back to you, Aaron. When you look at President Biden's take on these very topics, the previous president or the president-elect, Trump, did mention Greenland during his earlier administration. Did President Biden follow up on that very topic with, for instance, the leaders of Greenland and Denmark at all? And what were the interactions like?
I think the short answer to that is no. There's not been any engagement with those countries as a result of what the former president, the president-elect, said he wanted to do. At the same time, the governor makes a really good point about these rare minerals and resources that are in Greenland. Those are things that the U.S. government is obviously very much aware of. There are military assets, U.S. military assets, also in Greenland. And so the Biden administration has made a very deliberate effort to maintain good working relationships and development, economic and national security development relationships with the Danes, and obviously on Greenland in particular, trying to support national security interests here and to make sure that there is a way to have U.S. allies have the same sorts of relationships with the Danes as it relates to Greenland, and being able to have access to those rare earth materials that are on the island. And so that's what really has been a focus of the Biden administration over the last almost 4 years now in terms of its interactions with Greenland, not necessarily interactions that are trying to sort of make things better after what President-elect Trump said several years back.
Governor, building on what Aaron was saying there, national security, international security, these are real issues. We are looking at a part of the world that is adjacent to Russia, and that we do have a military base, the United States does, in the northern parts of Greenland specifically. When you look at those who might write this off as not so serious, what might be the seriousness about this that some may be underestimating in terms of this idea at some level?
Well, one of the concerns is that China, in the middle of a serious trade war, if things continue to get worse, China could withhold these rare earth materials, these minerals, which we really need. So this is not about the fact that we want to dismiss that. It's just you're not going to get there by beating up Denmark. It's just not going to happen. But we're back to NATO. We're back to the Western nations, which have to work together for everybody's security. Look, you give the president credit for working them over a little bit to get them to spend more money on defense. They should. But that cooperation should also yield some good things for us. And, one of the concerns, Richard, when it comes to shipping, for example, is we don't have a fleet. We don't have a U.S. fleet. Trying to rebuild it costs a fortune to do that. So we rely on these foreign carriers. And I've seen times when they've just spiked everything up. And you remember this dock war, this war with the longshoremen. That was because what was been happening is these foreign carriers operate in countries that we have relationships with. They want to modernize the ports, and the workers there say, we don't want you to modernize it because we don't want to lose our jobs. So there's lots of things tied up. But being able to talk to other governments and get them to work with us is, I think, a prescription for success, as I said a little bit earlier.
Right. And Julie, to you on this, those are real practical topics potentially for the consumer. As we remember that supply chain fiasco that the governor was bringing up, we all saw it across the country. We all felt it. All of a sudden, we became aware of what ports are and the different flags that these boats have that we never thought of before. Might this be a way of getting Democrats to respond to something that really does affect, if you will, the everyday person? And what might be that response from Democrats?
Well, look, there's a big difference between saying that we want cheaper routes through the Panama Canal and negotiating with the Panamanian government on that. Certainly, you can negotiate with the Danish on rare earth minerals and other aspects of whatever you want to have in Greenland, including national security. The way to not do that is to demean and to say that we're going to get our way, because, up to a point, you start to sound very much, as I said earlier, like Vladimir Putin, who says, well, you know what, we want a fleet on the Black Sea, so we're going to annex Crimea, or we want the breadbasket of Europe to be part of our country, so we're going to annex Ukraine. This is 19th century thinking. This is not how people operate and the countries operate and nations operate or should operate in the 21st century. Negotiation and diplomacy is how you do it. You don't do it by sheer brute force, because we see how that ends up. And ultimately, as much as the United States thinks that we don't want to be pushed around by anybody, nobody is pushing us around. Everybody's trying to negotiate the best deal for themselves and for their country. We have more ability to do that because we're the United States, but it doesn't mean that you need to start going down to Central America or going up to Greenland or going over to Europe and bigfooting countries and effectively saying that if we don't get our way, we're going to take it by force, or we're going to just acquire it, when nobody's interested in being acquired. And that's the bottom line. Look, you may be happy or you may be unhappy with the fact that the United States cut a deal in the 70s to give the Panama Canal back to the Panamanians, but nevertheless, here we are. You may not be happy that the Danes have Greenland, but nevertheless, here we are. And so rather than strong-arming all of our allies into having things done our way, what we need to do is figure out a diplomatic route, which is something Donald Trump is just entirely incapable of doing, to try to get to what Governor Kasich was saying, which is that these are real concerns from both a national security perspective and from a trade perspective. And nevertheless, you cannot do that by not sitting down and talking to our allies as allies and not as adversaries.